The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the cramped briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, casting harsh shadows across the faces of 23 elite operators who had gathered for what should have been a routine intelligence update. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the front of the room, his weathered hands gripping a classified folder that contained information none of them were prepared to hear. The air conditioning struggled against the August heat, and the familiar scent of salt water drifted through the partially open windows, a constant reminder of the Pacific Ocean that had forged every person in that room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat in the back corner, her small frame almost swallowed by the standard-issue chair, trying to ignore the sideways glances and whispered comments that had become as much a part of her daily routine as morning PT. At 28, she was the first female operator to complete the full Navy SEAL training pipeline, a distinction that had earned her nothing but skepticism and resentment from the brotherhood she had fought so hard to join. Her compact build and analytical approach to problem-solving had been interpreted as weakness by men who valued physical dominance above all else. The morning's training exercise had ended with Petty Officer Rodriguez making another joke about women in combat roles, suggesting that Sarah would probably cry during their next high-stress scenario. The laughter that followed still echoed in her ears, but she had learned to keep her expression neutral, her emotions carefully controlled. She had graduated at the top of her class in tactical analysis and electronic warfare at the Naval Academy, but her teammates seemed more interested in her perceived emotional instability than her actual qualifications. To them, she represented everything wrong with the military's push for inclusion. A liability wrapped in good intentions, waiting for the inevitable moment when her emotions would compromise a mission and get real operators killed. They called her Ice Queen behind her back, a nickname that reflected both her controlled demeanor and their belief that she was fundamentally unsuited for the heat of combat operations. Commander Morrison's voice cut through the underlying tension like a blade. "DevGRU, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Intelligence sources have confirmed the existence of a terrorist cell operating within the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Their objective appears to be the acquisition and deployment of a radiological dispersal device targeting federal facilities." Sarah leaned forward, her analytical mind immediately processing the implications of what Morrison had just revealed. A dirty bomb in the nation's capital would cause catastrophic damage far beyond the immediate blast zone. The psychological impact alone would fundamentally alter American society, creating panic and paranoia that could last for generations. She noticed several potential vulnerabilities in the preliminary intelligence assessment displayed on the wall-mounted screens, but experience had taught her to remain silent unless directly asked for input. Morrison continued his briefing, outlining what intelligence agencies knew about the threat. The terrorist organization had been tracked for 18 months as they moved personnel and materials into position around Washington, D.C. Their leader was a former nuclear engineer who had been radicalized after losing his family in a drone strike overseas. The combination of technical expertise and personal motivation made him extraordinarily dangerous. Sarah studied the target profiles and logistical assessments with the intensity of someone who understood that details could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Her background in electronic warfare had given her insights into how modern terrorist organizations operated, particularly their reliance on digital communications and remote detonation systems. She could see patterns in their operational behavior that suggested specific vulnerabilities, but when she raised her hand to offer observations, Morrison barely acknowledged her presence. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the team's senior enlisted leader, was reviewing potential insertion points when Sarah finally spoke up. "Sir, the communication intercepts suggest they're using a distributed command structure. If we could isolate their digital traffic patterns, we might be able to identify their primary coordination node and disrupt their timeline." The suggestion was met with the kind of dismissive silence that had become familiar to Sarah over the past 18 months. Rodriguez shook his head with obvious frustration. "Here we go again. The tech geek thinks she can solve everything with computers instead of bullets." Petty Officer Thompson, whose massive frame and multiple combat deployments had earned him legendary status within the community, looked directly at Sarah with barely concealed irritation. "Maybe stick to what you know, Chen. Leave the tactical planning to people who've actually been in a real firefight. The comments stung because it highlighted the fundamental catch-22 of Sarah's position. She couldn't prove herself in combat without being given combat assignments, but she couldn't get combat assignments because her teammates didn't trust her capabilities. Her technical expertise was dismissed as academic theory, irrelevant to the brutal realities of special operations. Morrison continued the briefing without acknowledging Sarah's input, focusing instead on traditional direct action approaches that relied primarily on overwhelming force and superior tactics. The plan called for simultaneous raids on 3 suspected safe houses, with the assumption that at least one would contain the radiological device or intelligence leading to its location. Sarah had reviewed the same intelligence materials the night before, spending hours analyzing communication patterns and operational indicators that suggested a more complex scenario than the briefing acknowledged. The terrorists weren't operating from fixed locations. They were using a mobile network that shifted constantly to avoid detection. More importantly, the timing of their communications suggested they were much closer to operational readiness than anyone realized. As the briefing concluded and operators began checking their equipment, Sarah overheard Thompson talking to Rodriguez near the weapons locker. "How long before she breaks down crying during a real operation?" Thompson asked, adjusting the sights on his rifle. Rodriguez shrugged, loading magazines with practiced efficiency. "Probably the first time someone shoots back. These emotional types always fold under pressure. All that sensitivity training doesn't mean anything when the bullets start flying." Williams joined the conversation, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived more combat deployments than anyone in the room. Command should have assigned her to intelligence analysis or logistics. Special operations is no place for someone who thinks feelings matter more than mission accomplishment. Sarah pretended not to hear the conversation, focusing instead on her own equipment preparation. Her HK-416 assault rifle was meticulously maintained, every component cleaned and tested to perfection. Her electronic warfare gear represented the most advanced systems available to military operators, devices that could intercept, analyze, and disrupt enemy communications in real time. While her teammates questioned her emotional stability, she had spent countless hours mastering technologies that might prove crucial in unconventional scenarios. The truth was that Sarah had specifically requested assignment to DEVGRU because she wanted to prove that technical expertise and emotional intelligence could be assets rather than liabilities in special operations. Growing up in Silicon Valley, she had learned programming and electronic systems from her father, a former Air Force electronics specialist who had taught her that modern warfare was increasingly about information superiority rather than pure physical force. But none of that mattered to her teammates. To them, she represented a dangerous experiment in political correctness, a compromise of operational standards in service of social engineering. They saw her controlled emotional responses as evidence of instability rather than professionalism, her analytical approach as hesitation rather than thoroughness. That evening, as Sarah sat alone in her quarters, she reviewed intelligence reports on her personal laptop, cross-referencing communication intercepts with known terrorist operational patterns. She had identified several concerning indicators that suggested the threat was more imminent than official assessments indicated. The terrorists were using sophisticated encryption and operational security measures that indicated extensive planning and resources. Most importantly, she had discovered what appeared to be a coordinated surveillance operation targeting multiple federal facilities simultaneously. The pattern suggested they weren't planning a single attack, but rather a series of coordinated strikes designed to maximize psychological impact and governmental disruption. The Pentagon, Capitol Building, and White House were all being systematically reconnoitered by individuals connected to the same communication network. But Sarah knew better than to bring these concerns to Morrison again. Her previous attempts to share analytical insights had been dismissed as overthinking, and she had learned that her reputation for emotional sensitivity made her observations automatically suspect. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same qualities her teammates criticized, her attention to detail, systematic analysis, and consideration of psychological factors, were exactly the skills needed to understand and counter a sophisticated terrorist operation. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah made a mental commitment to herself. Whatever happened during the upcoming operation, she would prove that emotional intelligence and technical expertise were force multipliers rather than weaknesses. She would demonstrate that understanding human psychology and technological systems could be just as valuable as physical courage and tactical aggression. The ocean breeze carried the sound of waves against the Coronado shore that night, a rhythmic reminder of the forces that had shaped every SEAL who had ever earned the trident. Sarah lay awake listening to that sound, thinking about the mission ahead and the weight of expectations that seemed designed to ensure her failure. She had no way of knowing that in less than 72 hours she would be facing a crisis that would test every aspect of her training and character. A situation where her supposed emotional instability would become the key to preventing a nuclear catastrophe that could have killed thousands and fundamentally altered the course of American history. But she was about to discover that being underestimated by people who should have known better could become the greatest tactical advantage of all. The insertion into Washington, D.C. was supposed to be routine surveillance, the kind of operation that Dev Gray had conducted hundreds of times in urban environments around the world. Sarah found herself assigned to overwatch duty, positioned on a rooftop overlooking one of the suspected safe houses, while the primary assault team prepared to breach and clear the target building. Her role was to provide electronic surveillance and communications support, monitoring digital traffic that might indicate terrorist activity in the surrounding area. The August heat made the rooftop feel like a furnace, even in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah's electronic warfare equipment hummed quietly as it intercepted and analyzed the constant stream of digital communications flowing through the Washington metropolitan area. Her position gave her an excellent view of the target building, but more importantly, it allowed her to monitor the electromagnetic spectrum for any unusual activity that might indicate terrorist communications or remote detonation systems. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece as the assault team moved into position. Overwatch. Report status on electronic surveillance. Sarah scanned her equipment displays, noting the normal patterns of cell phone traffic, Wi-Fi networks, and radio communications that characterized any major urban area. All systems nominal, Command. No unusual electronic signatures detected in the target area. But even as she spoke, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. The digital traffic patterns around the target building were too clean, too normal. In her experience, terrorists' safe houses typically generated distinctive electronic signatures, the result of operational security measures and communication protocols. The complete absence of such indicators suggested either exceptional operational discipline or that they were watching an empty building. Rodriguez's voice came through the team communication channel, filled with the kind of aggressive confidence that had made him a legend in the special operations community. Ready to rock and roll. These terrorists picked the wrong city to threaten. Thompson's team had surrounded the building, and Sarah could see their thermal signatures through her advanced optics as they prepared for simultaneous entry from multiple points. The operation was proceeding exactly according to plan, which in Sarah's experience was often when things went most catastrophically wrong. Her electronic surveillance equipment suddenly detected a brief burst of encrypted communications originating from a location approximately 2 miles from the target building. The signal was sophisticated, using frequency hopping techniques and encryption protocols that indicated military-grade equipment. More concerning was the timing, occurring just as the assault team reached their final positions. Command. I'm detecting encrypted communications from an off-site location. Signal characteristics suggest advanced operational security measures. Sarah kept her voice calm and professional, but her analytical mind was processing implications that sent chills down her spine. Morrison's response was predictably dismissive. Overwatch. Maintain focus on your assigned sector. The assault team can handle whatever's in that building. Sarah wanted to explain that the communications burst suggested the terrorists had surveillance on the assault team, that they might be walking into a trap, or that the real threat was somewhere else entirely. But she had learned that unsolicited tactical observations were unwelcome, especially from someone whose emotional stability was considered questionable. The breach happened with textbook precision. Flashbang grenades shattered the pre-dawn silence as assault teams poured through windows and doors simultaneously. Sarah watched through her optics as the building was systematically cleared, room by room, with the kind of professional efficiency that had made DevGrayu the most feared special operations unit in the world. But the building was empty, not just temporarily vacant, but deliberately clean, as if it had been prepared for inspection. No furniture, no personal belongings, no indication that anyone had ever lived there. Most importantly, no radiological device and no intelligence materials that might lead to its location. "Building clear," Thompson reported, his voice carrying a note of confusion that was unusual for someone of his experience. "Target location is negative for personnel, negative for materials, negative for intelligence." Sarah felt her electronic surveillance equipment detect another burst of encrypted communications, this one longer and more complex than the first. The signal originated from the same off-site location, but the increased duration suggested coordination of multiple assets rather than simple surveillance reporting. Her training told her that someone was orchestrating a response to the raid, possibly repositioning assets or accelerating operational timelines. "Command, I'm detecting increased electronic activity from the same off-site location. Pattern analysis suggests coordination of multiple elements in response to our operation." Morrison's voice carried an edge of frustration that reflected the growing realization that their intelligence had been fundamentally flawed. "Overwatch, can you triangulate the source of those communications?" Sarah was already working the problem, using her electronic warfare systems to analyze signal characteristics and estimate transmission locations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The techniques required sophisticated understanding of radio wave propagation in urban environments, factoring in building reflections and atmospheric conditions that could affect accuracy. "Working on it, Command." Initial estimates placed the source in the vicinity of the Pentagon metro station. The location made Sarah's blood run cold. The Pentagon was one of the most heavily defended facilities in the world, but it was also a symbol that terrorists had successfully attacked before. If the radiological device was positioned near the Pentagon, the psychological impact would be devastating, even if the physical damage was contained. Rodriguez's voice cut through the communication channel with characteristic sarcasm. "Great, the tech geek thinks she can solve everything with radio waves, while the real threat is probably setting up somewhere else." But Chief Williams, whose combat experience had taught him to pay attention to all sources of intelligence, was beginning to take Sarah's observations seriously. "Chen, what's your confidence level on that location estimate?" Sarah had been running continuous calculations on her equipment, refining her estimates as she gathered more data from the intermittent communication bursts. "Moderate to high confidence, Chief. The signal characteristics and timing patterns suggest a coordination node rather than a simple communication relay." Thompson's team was conducting a more thorough search of the empty building, looking for any trace evidence that might indicate terrorist presence or future plans. But Sarah's attention was focused on the increasing frequency of electronic communications from the Pentagon area. The pattern suggested not just coordination, but active preparation for something imminent. "Command, electronic activity is increasing in frequency and complexity. I recommend immediate investigation of the Pentagon metro area." Morrison's response reflected the kind of tactical conservatism that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. "Negative, Overwatch. We have 2 more target buildings to clear. Maintain your current position and continue electronic surveillance." Sarah understood the logic of Morrison's decision. They had specific intelligence pointing to 3 potential safe houses, and abandoning that intelligence based on electronic intercepts would be tactically unsound. But her analysis of the communication patterns was pointing to a different conclusion, one that suggested their original intelligence had been designed to misdirect them away from the real target. As the assault team moved to the second target location, Sarah continued monitoring electronic communications from her Overwatch position. The signals from the Pentagon area were becoming more frequent and more sophisticated, suggesting increased activity and coordination. More concerning was the detection of what appeared to be timer-related communications, short burst transmissions that occurred at regular intervals. Her electronic warfare training had taught her to recognize the signatures of remote detonation systems, and what she was detecting bore disturbing similarities to those patterns. If the terrorists were using remote detonation for a radiological device, the timer communications suggested they were in final preparation phases, possibly with only hours remaining before activation. The second target building yielded similar results to the first: empty, clean, and devoid of any evidence that might lead to the actual location of the terrorist cell or their radiological device. Sarah's electronic surveillance continued to detect increasing activity from the Pentagon area, but her attempts to share this information were met with growing irritation from the command structure. "Overwatch, you're starting to sound like a broken record," Rodriguez complained. "Maybe focus on your actual assignment instead of chasing electronic ghosts." The dismissive attitude was infuriating because Sarah could see patterns in the data that pointed to an imminent threat, but she lacked the credibility to make her observations heard by people who had already decided she was emotionally unstable. The irony was that her systematic analysis and attention to detail, the very qualities that made her teammates question her suitability for combat operations, were exactly what was needed to understand the sophisticated operation they were facing. As dawn broke over Washington, D.C., painting the sky in shades of gold and orange that would have been beautiful under different circumstances, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. The communication patterns she was detecting pointed to an imminent threat at one of the most important facilities in the country, and she could not remain passive while people dismissed her analysis based on their preconceptions about her emotional stability. The third target building was already being approached by Thompson's team when Sarah detected the most concerning signal yet: a complex burst transmission that included what appeared to be activation codes followed by a timer sequence. Her electronic warfare systems identified the signal as consistent with remote detonation protocols, suggesting that whatever the terrorists were planning was entering its final phase. Command: I'm detecting what appears to be activation sequences in the electronic traffic. Timing suggests imminent threat activation in the Pentagon area. Morrison's voice carried the exhaustion of a commander dealing with multiple failed leads and the growing pressure of a time-sensitive operation. Overwatch: unless you have concrete evidence of an immediate threat, maintain your current assignment. Sarah looked at her electronic warfare displays, seeing patterns that her training and experience told her represented a clear and present danger to thousands of people. The methodical approach that had sustained her through SEAL training now demanded action, even if that action contradicted direct orders and potentially ended her military career. She had been taught that special operations required the courage to make decisions under uncertainty, to act on incomplete information when the consequences of inaction were unacceptable. Now she faced exactly that situation, with electronic intelligence pointing to an imminent terrorist attack and a command structure that refused to take her analysis seriously. The morning sun was climbing higher over the nation's capital, and Sarah's electronic warfare equipment was painting a picture of terrorist activity that demanded immediate response. She had sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't include exceptions for situations where her credibility was questioned or her emotional stability was doubted. As Thompson's team breached the third and final target building, Sarah made the decision that would either vindicate her training and prove her worth to the special operations community, or end her career in disgrace and court-martial proceedings. She was about to discover that sometimes the most important battles were fought not by following orders, but by having the courage to trust your training and act on your convictions when everyone else had written you off as too emotional to be trusted with the hard decisions that defined life and death in the shadow world of special operations. The decision to disobey direct orders was not one that Sarah made lightly. Every aspect of her military training emphasized the importance of command structure and following orders, even when those orders seemed questionable. But her electronic warfare systems were painting a picture of imminent danger that demanded immediate action, and she could not remain passive while her teammates dismissed critical intelligence based on their preconceptions about her emotional fitness for combat operations. Sarah quietly packed her electronic surveillance equipment and prepared to move from her Overwatch position. Her analysis of the communication patterns indicated that the terrorist cell was operating from somewhere in the vicinity of the Pentagon metro station, using sophisticated encryption and operational security measures that suggested extensive planning and resources. More concerning was the timer-based communication sequence she had detected, which bore disturbing similarities to remote detonation protocols. The third target building had yielded the same results as the first two: empty, clean, and devoid of any evidence that might lead to the actual terrorist threat. Sarah's conviction that they were being deliberately misdirected grew stronger with each failed raid. The terrorists had fed false intelligence to coalition forces, drawing the most elite counterterrorism unit in the country away from their real target while they prepared to detonate a radiological device in the heart of the nation's capital. Her movement from the rooftop required careful planning to avoid detection by her own teammates. Sarah had learned urban evasion techniques during her training, skills designed for operating in hostile territory where discovery meant capture or death. Now she was applying those same techniques to avoid her own command structure, an irony that was not lost on her as she made her way through the early morning streets of Washington, D.C. The city was beginning to wake up, as federal employees made their way to offices throughout the metropolitan area. The Pentagon would soon be filled with thousands of military personnel and civilian contractors, all of whom would be exposed to radiological contamination if the terrorists succeeded in their mission. Sarah's electronic warfare equipment continued to detect increasing communication activity from the target area, suggesting that whatever operation was planned was entering its final phases. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her radio as he attempted to re-establish contact. Overwatch. Report your status and maintain surveillance of the operational area. Sarah turned off her radio, knowing that maintaining communication would allow them to track her location and potentially interfere with her investigation of the Pentagon metro area. The action was another violation of operational protocols, but her analysis of the electronic intelligence convinced her that conventional approaches would not be sufficient to prevent the imminent terrorist attack. The Pentagon metro station was one of the busiest transportation hubs in the Washington area, serving thousands of commuters who worked at the massive military complex. The station's underground layout and multiple access points would provide excellent concealment for a radiological device, while the constant flow of personnel would ensure maximum exposure to contamination. Sarah's understanding of terrorist psychology suggested that the symbolism of attacking the Pentagon would be irresistible to a group seeking to maximize psychological impact. Her electronic warfare equipment detected another burst of encrypted communications as she approached the metro station. The signal was stronger now, confirming her triangulation estimates and suggesting that she was moving in the right direction. More importantly, the communication patterns were becoming more frequent and more complex, indicating coordination of multiple elements in preparation for something significant. Sarah's training had taught her to analyze terrorist operational patterns, and what she was observing suggested a sophisticated organization with extensive resources and planning capabilities. The use of military-grade encryption and frequency-hopping techniques indicated access to advanced technology, while the timing and coordination of communications suggested professional operational security training. The Pentagon metro station was already crowded with morning commuters when Sarah arrived, a constant stream of military personnel and federal employees making their way to work. The sight of so many potential victims strengthened her resolve to investigate the electronic intelligence, even if it meant acting without authorization from her command structure. Her electronic surveillance equipment was designed to be portable and inconspicuous, allowing her to conduct detailed analysis while moving through the station. The signals she had been tracking were definitely originating from this area, but pinpointing the exact location would require close-range investigation of potential concealment sites. The station's architecture provided numerous locations where a radiological device could be hidden. Maintenance areas, electrical rooms, and storage facilities offered concealment from casual observation while remaining accessible for final preparation and activation. Sarah's analysis of the communication patterns suggested that the terrorists were using multiple positions for coordination and surveillance, making detection more challenging. As she moved through the station, Sarah's equipment detected what appeared to be a command and control node located in one of the lower levels. The electronic signature was consistent with sophisticated communication equipment and possibly remote detonation systems. More concerning was the detection of what appeared to be radiological monitoring equipment, suggesting that the terrorists were tracking radiation levels in preparation for device activation. Her SEAL training had included extensive instruction in nuclear and radiological threats, covering both the technical aspects of such weapons and the operational procedures for dealing with them. A radiological dispersal device, commonly known as a dirty bomb, would not create a nuclear explosion, but would spread radioactive contamination over a wide area. The Pentagon and surrounding areas could be rendered uninhabitable for years, while the psychological impact would fundamentally alter American society. Sarah's electronic warfare systems detected another timer sequence, this one indicating a countdown that suggested activation within hours rather than days. The realization that the terrorist attack was imminent drove her to accelerate her investigation, even though operating alone in a potentially hostile environment violated every principle of special operations safety. The lower levels of the metro station were less crowded, but provided better concealment for both terrorist operations and her own investigation. Sarah's equipment was painting a clearer picture of the terrorist network with each passing minute, Multiple communication nodes were coordinating activities throughout the area, suggesting a larger operation than intelligence agencies had anticipated. Her detection equipment identified what appeared to be surveillance positions monitoring the main entrances to the Pentagon. The terrorists had established overwatch positions that would allow them to observe any response to their attack while remaining concealed from casual detection. The sophistication of their operational security was impressive and deeply concerning. Sarah's analysis of the communication patterns revealed something that made her blood run cold. The terrorists were not planning a single radiological attack. They were coordinating multiple devices positioned at strategic locations throughout the Washington area. The Pentagon was the primary target, but secondary devices were positioned to maximize contamination and psychological impact. The implications of multiple radiological devices were staggering. The terrorists could contaminate vast areas of the nation's capital while overwhelming the response capabilities of emergency services. The economic and political impact would be catastrophic, potentially triggering social collapse and fundamentally altering the course of American history. Her electronic surveillance detected movement in one of the maintenance areas, and Sarah carefully positioned herself to observe without being detected. Through her advanced optics, she could see two individuals working with what appeared to be electronic equipment and containers that could potentially house radiological materials. Their movements were purposeful and coordinated, suggesting extensive training and preparation. Sarah's training had taught her to gather intelligence before taking action, but the timer sequences she was detecting suggested that time was running short. The terrorists appeared to be in final preparation phases, possibly with only hours remaining before activation of their devices. She faced a critical decision: attempt to gather more intelligence at the risk of allowing the attack to proceed, or take immediate action based on incomplete information. Her electronic warfare equipment detected another encrypted transmission, this one containing what appeared to be final authorization codes. The signal was transmitted to multiple receivers, suggesting that all elements of the terrorist network were being activated simultaneously. Sarah realized that she was witnessing the final countdown to a coordinated attack that could kill thousands and contaminate the nation's capital for decades. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. Sarah was alone, operating without authorization or support, facing a sophisticated terrorist network that had been planning this operation for months or possibly years. Her teammates had dismissed her as too emotional for combat operations, but she was now the only person in position to prevent a catastrophic attack on American soil. Her SEAL training had emphasized the importance of maintaining operational security while gathering intelligence, but the circumstances demanded immediate action. Sarah carefully documented the terrorist positions and activities using her surveillance equipment, creating a record that could be used by response teams if she was unable to prevent the attack herself. The maintenance area where she had observed terrorist activity appeared to be the primary coordination center for their operation. Multiple communication systems were visible, along with what appeared to be timing devices and possibly radiological monitoring equipment. The setup suggested a sophisticated command and control capability that could coordinate attacks across multiple locations. Sarah's electronic warfare systems detected another timer sequence, this one indicating that activation was imminent within the next few hours. The realization that thousands of lives hung in the balance drove her to make a decision that would either vindicate her training and prove her worth as a special operator, or result in her death in a maintenance tunnel beneath the Pentagon metro station. Her equipment had identified at least 3 separate radiological devices positioned throughout the station and surrounding area. Each device was monitored by sophisticated electronic systems that could trigger remote detonation or detect attempts at interference. The terrorists had planned their operation with impressive attention to detail and redundancy. The psychological profile of the terrorist leader suggested someone with extensive technical training and personal motivation for attacking American targets. Sarah's analysis of their communication patterns revealed operational security practices that indicated military or intelligence training, making them far more dangerous than typical terrorist organizations. Her position in the lower levels of the metro station provided excellent surveillance of terrorist activities, but also left her isolated from any possible support or extraction. Sarah understood that she was completely on her own, with no backup and no communication with her unit. The decision to investigate the Pentagon area had effectively cut her off from the military structure that had trained and equipped her. The electronic intelligence she was gathering painted a picture of an imminent attack that would exceed anything in the history of domestic terrorism. Multiple radiological devices, coordinated by sophisticated command and control systems, positioned to maximize casualties and contamination while overwhelming response capabilities. The operation represented years of planning and preparation by people with extensive resources and training. Sarah's surveillance equipment detected movement in multiple locations throughout the station, suggesting that the terrorist network was larger than she had initially estimated. The coordination of activities across multiple positions indicated a level of organization and resources that was deeply concerning. These were not amateur terrorists driven by ideology alone, but professionals with extensive training and equipment. Her electronic warfare systems identified what appeared to be countermeasures designed to detect and interfere with law enforcement or military surveillance. The terrorists had anticipated the possibility of discovery and had prepared electronic defenses that could compromise conventional investigation techniques. Sarah's specialized equipment and training were giving her advantages that traditional law enforcement would not possess. The timer sequences she was detecting were becoming more frequent and more specific, indicating that the terrorist operation was entering its final phase. Multiple devices were being prepared for activation, with coordination timing that suggested a simultaneous attack designed to maximize impact and minimize response effectiveness. Sarah realized that she was probably the only person in the world who understood the full scope of the terrorist threat. Her electronic intelligence had revealed a coordinated attack involving multiple radiological devices, sophisticated command and control systems, and operational security measures that had successfully evaded traditional intelligence gathering. The responsibility for preventing this attack rested entirely on her shoulders. Her position beneath the Pentagon metro station was becoming increasingly dangerous as terrorist activity intensified in preparation for the attack. Sarah's training told her to establish communication with higher authority and coordinate a response involving multiple agencies and specialized units. But her analysis of the timer sequences suggested that there was no time for conventional responses. The electronic intelligence was clear. Multiple radiological devices were positioned and ready for activation within hours. The terrorist network had established surveillance and command capabilities that would allow them to monitor any response and potentially accelerate their timeline if they detected interference. Sarah faced the most critical decision of her military career. She could attempt to withdraw from the area and report her intelligence to higher authority, knowing that conventional response procedures would probably not be fast enough to prevent the attack. Or she could use her specialized training and equipment to attempt direct action against the terrorist network, operating alone against overwhelming odds with no support or backup. The faces of the thousands of people who would be affected by radiological contamination flashed through her mind. Military personnel, federal employees, and civilians who had no idea that they were about to become victims of the most sophisticated terrorist attack in American history. Sarah's oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, demanded action regardless of personal risk or career consequences. Her electronic warfare equipment detected final activation sequences being transmitted to multiple devices throughout the area. The terrorist attack was no longer a future threat, but an imminent reality. Sarah Chen, the SEAL operator who had been dismissed as too emotional for combat operations, was about to become the last line of defense between a sophisticated terrorist network and a radiological catastrophe that could reshape American society forever. The activation sequences were accelerating now, coming through Sarah's electronic warfare systems with the precision of a digital countdown to disaster. She had identified 4 separate radiological devices positioned throughout the Pentagon metro complex, each one capable of spreading lethal contamination across miles of the nation's capital. The terrorist network had spent months positioning these weapons, and they were now in the final minutes before simultaneous detonation. Sarah's hands moved across her equipment with the fluid efficiency that had carried her through the most demanding training in the military. Her electronic analysis revealed that the primary command node was located in a maintenance facility directly beneath the main Pentagon metro platform. From that position, the terrorist leader could monitor the entire operation while remaining concealed from conventional security sweeps. The sophistication of their operation was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Multiple radiological devices with remote detonation capabilities, coordinated timing systems that would ensure simultaneous activation, and surveillance networks that could detect and respond to any interference. These were not amateur terrorists driven by simple ideology, but professionals who had turned mass destruction into a science. Her electronic surveillance detected the terrorist leader moving between positions in the maintenance facility, apparently conducting final checks on the detonation systems. Through her advanced optics, Sarah could see a man in his 40s with the methodical bearing of someone who understood exactly what he was doing. His movements were calm and purposeful, suggesting complete confidence in his preparations and timeline. The timer displays on her equipment showed less than 90 minutes remaining before synchronized detonation. In that time, thousands of morning commuters would flood into the metro station and Pentagon complex, creating maximum exposure to radiological contamination. The psychological impact would be devastating, but the long-term health consequences for survivors would be even worse. Sarah's analysis of the terrorist communication patterns revealed something that made her situation even more desperate. The network included surveillance teams monitoring the main approaches to the Pentagon, with instructions to accelerate the detonation timeline if they detected any unusual law enforcement or military activity. Her own presence in the area had probably already been noted, which meant the terrorists might advance their schedule. Her electronic warfare training had taught her to think like her opponents, to understand their operational psychology and exploit their assumptions. The terrorist leader clearly believed that his operation was undetectable, and that American response capabilities were inadequate to counter a sophisticated, coordinated attack. His confidence would be his weakness, but only if Sarah could exploit it before the devices were activated. The maintenance facility where the command node was located had multiple access points, but all of them were monitored by the terrorist surveillance network. Sarah's approach would have to be carefully planned to avoid detection while allowing her to reach the detonation controls before the final countdown sequence began. Her SEAL training had prepared her for exactly this type of solo infiltration, but never under such extreme time pressure. Her equipment detected another encrypted transmission, this one containing what appeared to be final target confirmation and activation authorization. The signal was broadcast to all 4 device locations simultaneously, indicating that the terrorist network was moving into its final operational phase. Sarah realized that she probably had less than an hour before the attack began. The weight of thousands of lives rested on her shoulders as she prepared to infiltrate the terrorist command facility. Every person in the Pentagon complex, every commuter in the metro station, every federal employee in the surrounding buildings would be exposed to lethal radiation if she failed to prevent the coordinated detonation. The responsibility was overwhelming, but her training had taught her to focus on mission objectives rather than consequences. Sarah's movement through the lower levels of the metro complex required every stealth technique she had learned during SEAL training. The terrorists had established multiple surveillance positions, but their focus was primarily on the main access routes and official security checkpoints. Her knowledge of building schematics and maintenance systems gave her advantages that the terrorists had not anticipated. Her electronic warfare equipment continued to monitor terrorist communications as she moved closer to the command facility. The frequency and complexity of their transmissions were increasing, suggesting coordination of final preparations across all 4 device locations. More concerning was the detection of what appeared to be dead man switches, fail-safe systems that would trigger detonation if the command node lost contact with the individual devices. The implications of dead man switches were staggering. Even if Sarah could disable the primary detonation system, the loss of command signals would automatically trigger all 4 devices. She would need to maintain the appearance of normal operations while systematically disabling each component of the terrorist network. The technical challenge was immense, requiring skills that pushed the boundaries of her electronic warfare training. Her position outside the maintenance facility gave her visual confirmation of the terrorist command setup. Multiple computer systems were monitoring the radiological devices, with real-time displays showing radiation levels, timer countdowns, and communication status for each location. The sophistication of the operation was impressive and deeply troubling. The terrorist leader was working at a central console, apparently conducting final systems checks before authorizing detonation. His calm demeanor suggested complete confidence in his preparations and timing. Sarah could see weapons and additional personnel in the facility, indicating that the terrorists were prepared for the possibility of discovery and resistance. Her electronic analysis revealed that the command system used a distributed architecture with redundant communication links and backup detonation triggers. The terrorists had anticipated the possibility of interference and had built multiple fail-safes into their operation. Disabling the attack would require systematic neutralization of each component while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. Sarah's training had emphasized the importance of patience and timing in special operations, but the circumstances demanded immediate action. The timer displays showed less than 40 minutes remaining before synchronized detonation, and her analysis of terrorist communications suggested that the final countdown sequence was about to begin. Her infiltration of the maintenance facility required precise timing and flawless execution. The terrorists had established security protocols, but their focus was on external threats rather than internal infiltration. Sarah's knowledge of building systems and her electronic warfare capabilities gave her advantages that conventional security measures could not counter. The facility's interior was larger than she had expected, with multiple rooms containing different aspects of the terrorist operation. The main command center housed the primary detonation controls and communication systems, while adjacent rooms contained backup equipment and what appeared to be additional radiological materials. The scope of the operation was far beyond anything intelligence agencies had anticipated. Sarah's electronic warfare equipment allowed her to monitor terrorist communications while remaining undetected by their security systems. The conversations she intercepted revealed final preparations for what the terrorists called Operation Cleansing Fire, an attack designed to contaminate the nation's capital and trigger societal collapse through radiological terror. Her analysis of the command systems revealed that the terrorist leader had implemented sophisticated security protocols that would require both technical expertise and physical access to defeat. The detonation controls were protected by multiple authentication systems, while the communication networks used military-grade encryption that would be nearly impossible to crack under normal circumstances. The terrorist personnel in the facility were focused on their final preparations, checking equipment and confirming communication links with the remote device locations. Their professional bearing and coordinated movements suggested extensive training and preparation. These were not amateur terrorists, but a sophisticated organization with resources and capabilities that rivaled government agencies. Sarah's position in the facility gave her the opportunity to observe the complete terrorist operation, but also exposed her to immediate danger if she was discovered. Her electronic warfare equipment was providing detailed intelligence about their systems and procedures, but translating that information into effective countermeasures would require skills that pushed the limits of her training. The timer displays throughout the command center showed 32 minutes remaining before synchronized detonation. The terrorist leader was now conducting final communications with each device location, confirming operational status and authentication protocols. His calm professionalism was more terrifying than any emotional fanaticism could have been. Her analysis of the terrorist communication protocols revealed a potential vulnerability in their security architecture. The authentication systems used biometric scanners tied to the terrorist leader's personal identification, but the backup systems relied on encrypted communication codes that could potentially be intercepted and replicated using her electronic warfare capabilities. Sarah's understanding of the terrorist psychology suggested that their confidence in their operational security would be their greatest weakness. They had planned for conventional law enforcement responses and military tactics, but they had not anticipated infiltration by a specialized electronic warfare operator with advanced technical capabilities and unconventional training. Her equipment detected the beginning of final countdown sequences being transmitted to all 4 device locations. The radiological weapons were entering their final activation phase, with timer displays showing synchronized countdowns that would ensure simultaneous detonation. Sarah realized that she had less than 30 minutes to prevent the most devastating terrorist attack in American history. The technical challenge of disabling 4 sophisticated radiological devices while maintaining operational security was beyond anything covered in conventional military training. Sarah would need to use every aspect of her electronic warfare education, combined with improvisational skills and pure determination, to prevent a catastrophe that could reshape American society. Her position in the command facility gave her access to the primary detonation controls, but the terrorist security systems were designed to prevent exactly the kind of interference she was attempting. Multiple authentication requirements, biometric scanners, and communication protocols created layers of protection that would normally be impossible to penetrate. The terrorist leader's voice carried clearly through the facility as he conducted final communications with his network. His tone was calm and professional, discussing technical details and timing coordination with the detached precision of someone who had reduced mass murder to a series of procedural steps. The clinical nature of his approach was more disturbing than any emotional display could have been. Sarah's electronic warfare systems had identified the specific frequencies and encryption protocols used by the terrorist communication network. Her equipment could potentially intercept and modify their signals, but the timing would have to be perfect to avoid triggering the dead man switches that would automatically detonate all 4 devices. Her training had taught her that special operations success often depended on exploiting enemy assumptions and expectations. The terrorists expected interference to come from conventional law enforcement or military responses, with predictable tactics and limited technical capabilities. They had not planned for infiltration by someone with advanced electronic warfare training and unconventional operational approaches. The facility's computer systems were displaying real-time status information from all 4 radiological devices, showing radiation levels, timer countdowns, and communication links. The sophistication of the monitoring systems was impressive, but also created potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with the right technical knowledge and equipment. Sarah's analysis of the terrorist operational procedures revealed that the final detonation sequence required manual authorization from the command facility, followed by automated countdown timers at each device location. The manual authorization would come from the terrorist leader personally, using biometric authentication and encrypted communication protocols. Her electronic warfare equipment had been recording all terrorist communications since she arrived at the facility, creating a database of authentication codes and communication protocols that could potentially be used to interfere with their operation. The challenge would be timing her interference to disable the devices without triggering the automated failsafe systems. The timer displays showed 26 minutes remaining before synchronized detonation. The terrorist leader was now conducting final equipment checks, moving between different control stations with the methodical precision of someone following a carefully rehearsed procedure. His confidence was absolute, reflecting months or years of preparation for this moment. Sarah's position in the facility required absolute silence and minimal movement to avoid detection by the terrorist security systems. Her electronic warfare equipment was operating in passive mode, gathering intelligence without transmitting signals that could be detected by enemy countermeasures. The technical demands of the situation pushed her training and equipment to their absolute limits. Her analysis of the terrorist command systems revealed that the detonation sequence used a 2-stage authentication process. The first stage required biometric confirmation from the terrorist leader, while the second stage involved encrypted authorization codes transmitted to each device location. Both stages would need to be compromised to prevent the attack. The facility's security cameras were monitoring all access points in operational areas, but Sarah's position gave her visual access to the main command console without entering the direct line of sight of the surveillance systems. Her electronic warfare training had included instruction in avoiding detection by sophisticated security networks. Her equipment detected increased communication activity between the command facility and the remote device locations. The terrorists were conducting final status checks and synchronization procedures, confirming that all 4 radiological weapons were operational and ready for detonation. The professional coordination of their activities was both impressive and terrifying. Sarah's understanding of electronic warfare principles suggested that the terrorist communication network could be vulnerable to signal injection attacks, where false authentication codes could be transmitted using their own communication protocols. The technique would require precise timing and detailed knowledge of their encryption systems. The terrorist leader's movements suggested that he was preparing to initiate the final detonation sequence. His calm demeanor and methodical approach indicated complete confidence in his operational security and timing. Sarah realized that she had perhaps 15 minutes remaining before the authorization codes were transmitted to all 4 devices. Her electronic warfare systems had identified specific vulnerabilities in the terrorist communication architecture. The encryption protocols used strong authentication, but the signal timing and frequency patterns could potentially be spoofed using advanced electronic warfare techniques. The challenge would be executing the attack without triggering the deadman switches. The facility's computer displays were showing final countdown sequences at all 4 device locations, with synchronized timers that would ensure simultaneous detonation. The psychological impact of coordinated radiological attacks across the nation's capital would be devastating, potentially triggering societal collapse and fundamentally altering American political structures. Sarah's training had emphasized that special operations often required making critical decisions with incomplete information under extreme time pressure. Her analysis of the terrorist operation suggested multiple potential approaches, but all of them involved significant risks and uncertain outcomes. The weight of thousands of lives demanded action despite the dangers. Her electronic warfare equipment had compiled a comprehensive picture of the terrorist network, including communication protocols, authentication systems, and operational procedures. The intelligence would be valuable for post-incident analysis, but its primary value was in providing the technical knowledge needed to interfere with their attack. The terrorist leader was now conducting final communications with each device location, confirming operational status and preparing for the authorization sequence. His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had reduced mass destruction to a technical procedure. The professional nature of his approach made him more dangerous than any emotional fanatic. Sarah's position in the command facility gave her access to the primary detonation controls, but the terrorist security systems created multiple layers of protection that would normally be impossible to penetrate. Her electronic warfare capabilities provided potential solutions, but the timing would have to be absolutely perfect to avoid triggering automated failsafe systems. Her analysis of the terrorist psychology suggested that their greatest strength was also their greatest vulnerability. The sophistication of their operational security had created a complex system with multiple potential failure points. A coordinated electronic attack could potentially cascade through their network, disrupting communications and disabling devices across all locations. The timer displays showed 18 minutes remaining before synchronized detonation. Sarah's electronic warfare systems were ready to execute a coordinated attack on the terrorist communication network, but the consequences of failure would be catastrophic. Thousands of lives hung in the balance as she prepared to test her training against one of the most sophisticated terrorist operations in history. Her equipment had identified the specific signal characteristics and timing patterns used by the terrorist authentication systems. The electronic warfare attack would need to intercept legitimate authorization codes while simultaneously injecting false commands that would disable the radiological devices without triggering failsafe systems. The terrorist leader was approaching the main command console, preparing to initiate the final detonation sequence. His movements were calm and purposeful, reflecting complete confidence in his preparations and operational security. Sarah realized that the next few minutes would determine whether her training and determination were sufficient to prevent a radiological catastrophe. Her electronic warfare systems initiated the attack with precision timing that had been drilled into her through countless hours of training. Multiple signal injection points began transmitting false authentication codes using the terrorist communication protocols, while simultaneously intercepting and blocking legitimate detonation commands. The response from the terrorist network was immediate and chaotic. Warning alarms began sounding throughout the command facility as the terrorists detected interference with their communication systems. The terrorist leader's calm demeanor shattered as he realized that his sophisticated operation was under attack by someone who understood his systems better than he had thought possible. Sarah's electronic warfare equipment was executing a coordinated assault on the terrorist network, systematically disabling communication links and injecting false status reports that made each device location believe it was receiving legitimate operational commands. The technical complexity of the attack pushed her equipment and training to their absolute limits. The terrorist security systems began active countermeasures, attempting to trace the source of the electronic interference and re-establish secure communications with the remote device locations. Sarah's equipment was designed to operate in hostile electronic environments, but the terrorist countermeasures were more sophisticated than intelligence agencies had anticipated. Her attack on the terrorist network was achieving partial success, with 2 of the 4 radiological devices showing disabled status on the command displays. However, the remaining devices were still operational, and the terrorist leader was attempting to manually override the communication systems to complete the detonation sequence. The facility erupted in activity as terrorist personnel attempted to diagnose and counter the electronic attack. Their training and equipment were impressive, but they had not anticipated infiltration by someone with advanced electronic warfare capabilities. Sarah's position remained concealed, but the intensity of their response suggested that discovery was inevitable. Her electronic warfare systems detected attempts by the terrorists to establish backup communication links with the remaining operational devices. The sophistication of their contingency planning was remarkable, but also created additional vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with the right technical knowledge and timing. The terrorist leader was now working frantically at the command console, attempting to bypass the electronic interference and re-establish control over his radiological weapons. His calm professionalism had been replaced by desperate determination as he realized that his carefully planned operation was being systematically dismantled by an unknown opponent. Sarah's analysis of the terrorist response patterns revealed that they were following predetermined contingency procedures, which meant their reactions would be predictable and therefore vulnerable to further electronic warfare attacks. Her equipment began targeting their backup communication systems, systematically eliminating redundant links and control pathways. The timer display showed 12 minutes remaining before the original detonation schedule, but the terrorist leader was attempting to accelerate the timeline by manually activating the remaining devices. His efforts were being frustrated by Sarah's electronic interference, but his technical knowledge was sufficient to pose a continuing threat. Her electronic warfare attack had successfully disabled 3 of the 4 radiological devices, but the final weapon remained operational and under terrorist control. The device was located in the main Pentagon metro platform, positioned to maximize casualties among morning commuters who were already beginning to flood into the station. The terrorist leader's attempts to manually detonate the remaining device were being blocked by Sarah's electronic warfare systems, but his persistence and technical expertise were gradually overcoming her interference. She realized that electronic warfare alone would not be sufficient to completely neutralize the threat. Her position in the command facility was becoming increasingly dangerous as terrorist security sweeps intensified in their search for the source of electronic interference. Sarah's concealment was excellent, but the systematic nature of their search procedures would eventually locate her position. The remaining radiological device was showing critical status on the command displays, with manual override procedures that could potentially bypass all electronic interference. The terrorist leader's technical knowledge was sufficient to complete the detonation sequence despite Sarah's electronic warfare attacks. Sarah's training had taught her that special operations sometimes required transitioning from technical approaches to direct action, when circumstances demanded immediate resolution. Her analysis of the terrorist leader's position and the facility layout suggested that direct intervention might be the only way to prevent detonation of the final device. Her movement through the command facility required absolute precision to avoid detection by the increasingly intense security sweeps. The terrorists were now conducting room-by-room searches while simultaneously attempting to complete the manual detonation sequence. Time was running out for both the attack and any chance of preventing it. The terrorist leader was working at the main command console with desperate intensity, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards as he attempted to bypass the electronic interference and establish direct communication with the final radiological device. His technical expertise was impressive, and his progress was gradually overcoming Sarah's electronic countermeasures. Her position behind the main command console gave her visual access to the terrorist leader's activities while remaining concealed from the security searches. The timer displays showed 8 minutes remaining before the accelerated detonation schedule, but the manual override procedures could potentially trigger immediate activation. Sarah's electronic warfare equipment detected successful establishment of backup communication links between the command facility and the final radiological device. The terrorist leader had overcome her interference through persistence and technical knowledge, creating a direct threat that could no longer be countered through electronic means alone. Her training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation, where technical solutions were insufficient and direct action became necessary to prevent catastrophic consequences. The terrorist leader was alone at the command console, focused entirely on completing the detonation sequence and unaware of her presence in the facility. The transition from electronic warfare to direct action required split-second timing and flawless execution. Sarah's movement from concealment to the command console had to be absolutely silent and precisely coordinated to prevent the terrorist leader from completing the manual detonation sequence. Her approach was executed with the fluid precision that had carried her through the most demanding training in the military. Years of preparation and countless hours of practice culminated in the few seconds required to reach the command console and neutralize the terrorist threat before the final device could be activated. The terrorist leader's reaction was immediate but ineffective. His focus on the technical aspects of the detonation sequence had left him unprepared for direct physical intervention. Sarah's training and preparation gave her decisive advantages in the brief but intense struggle that determined the fate of thousands of people. Her control of the command console allowed her to immediately implement emergency shutdown procedures for the final radiological device. The technical knowledge gained through her electronic warfare attacks provided the authentication codes and operational procedures needed to safely disable the weapon before it could be detonated. The facility's alarm systems were now broadcasting general alerts as terrorist personnel realized that their operation had been compromised and their leader neutralized. Sarah's position at the command console gave her access to all communication systems and operational controls, allowing her to coordinate with responding authorities while maintaining security over the disabled weapons. Her electronic warfare equipment was now being used to establish communication with Pentagon security forces and federal agencies, providing detailed intelligence about the terrorist network and the locations of all 4 radiological devices. The information she had gathered during her infiltration would be crucial for the comprehensive response needed to secure the weapons and apprehend remaining terrorist personnel. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Sarah's understanding of terrorist operational procedures suggested that additional cells or backup plans might still pose dangers. Her analysis of the intercepted communications revealed connections to other terrorist organizations and potential future threats that would require extensive investigation. Commander Morrison's voice crackled through her re-established communication link, filled with a mixture of relief and amazement that reflected the magnitude of what had just been prevented. Chen, what's your status? We're tracking massive electronic activity and emergency responses throughout the Pentagon area. Sarah's response was characteristically professional and focused on operational priorities rather than personal recognition. Command, terrorist threat has been neutralized. 4 radiological devices have been disabled and secured. Primary terrorist leader is in custody. Recommend immediate deployment of nuclear response teams for weapons recovery and site decontamination. The scope of the terrorist operation was becoming clear as Sarah transmitted her intelligence to higher authorities. The sophistication of their planning, the advanced nature of their equipment, and the coordination of their network indicated resources and capabilities that exceeded anything in the history of domestic terrorism. Her electronic warfare systems continued to monitor terrorist communication frequencies, detecting scattered transmissions from remaining network elements as they attempted to understand what had happened to their operation. The intelligence being gathered would be valuable for identifying and apprehending the broader terrorist organization. The Pentagon metro station was being evacuated as federal agencies responded to the radiological threat, but the thousands of people who had been exposed to potential contamination would never know how close they had come to a catastrophe that could have fundamentally altered their lives and American society. Sarah's actions had prevented what intelligence analysts would later describe as the most sophisticated and potentially devastating terrorist attack ever attempted on American soil. 4 radiological devices with the capability to contaminate vast areas of the nation's capital had been neutralized by a single operator working alone with advanced electronic warfare techniques and exceptional training. The responding agencies were amazed by the technical sophistication of the terrorist operation and the comprehensive intelligence that Sarah had gathered during her infiltration. Her electronic warfare capabilities had provided detailed information about terrorist communication networks, operational procedures, and potential connections to other threats. Chief Williams was among the first responders to reach the command facility, his expression reflecting a mixture of professional admiration and personal amazement at what Sarah had accomplished. Chen, we tracked your electronic signatures and realized you were conducting some kind of independent operation. Nobody anticipated anything on this scale. Her response revealed the analytical mindset that had enabled her to understand and counter the terrorist threat when conventional approaches had failed. Chief, the electronic intelligence painted a clear picture of coordinated radiological attacks. The timer sequences and communication patterns indicated imminent activation. Standard response procedures would not have been fast enough. Rodriguez and Thompson arrived with additional response teams, their previous skepticism about Sarah's capabilities replaced by genuine respect for someone who had prevented a national catastrophe through skill, determination, and technical expertise that none of them had fully appreciated. The terrorist command facility was being systematically documented by federal investigators, who were amazed by the sophistication of the operation and the comprehensive nature of the intelligence that Sarah had gathered. Her electronic warfare techniques had not only prevented the attack, but had also provided crucial information for understanding and countering future threats. General Hawkins arrived at the Pentagon within hours of the incident, her expression reflecting the gravity of what had been prevented and the exceptional performance of the operator who had single-handedly neutralized the threat. The briefing she received from Sarah was comprehensive and technically detailed, providing insights that would influence counterterrorism doctrine for years to come. The media coverage of the incident focused on the successful prevention of a major terrorist attack, but the specific details of Sarah's role were classified to protect operational security and ongoing investigations. The public would never know that a single Navy SEAL operator had prevented what could have been the most devastating attack in American history. Her teammates' attitudes towards Sarah underwent a fundamental transformation as they realized that the qualities they had dismissed as emotional instability were actually indicators of the analytical thinking and technical expertise that had made the difference between success and catastrophic failure. The training protocols at Naval Special Warfare Command were revised to incorporate lessons learned from Sarah's electronic warfare techniques and solo operational procedures. Her methods became case studies in how individual operators could counter sophisticated threats through advanced technical capabilities and unconventional approaches. Sarah's formal debriefing took place over several days as intelligence agencies sought to understand every aspect of the terrorist operation and the techniques she'd used to counter it. Her electronic warfare logs provided unprecedented insights into terrorist communication protocols and operational security measures. The recognition she received was significant but largely classified, reflecting the sensitive nature of the operation and the ongoing investigations into the terrorist network. Sarah's primary satisfaction came not from awards or commendations, but from the knowledge that her training and determination had prevented a catastrophe that could have claimed thousands of lives. The psychological impact of the incident on her unit was profound and lasting. The operators who had questioned her emotional fitness for combat roles now understood that different types of intelligence and expertise were required for different types of threats. Sarah had demonstrated that technical knowledge and analytical thinking could be just as valuable as traditional military virtues. Her role as an instructor expanded significantly as military leaders recognized the need for advanced electronic warfare capabilities in counterterrorism operations. Sarah's techniques and procedures became the foundation for new training programs that would prepare future operators for increasingly sophisticated threats. The terrorist network that had been dismantled through Sarah's operation was revealed to be far more extensive than initially understood. International connections and support networks indicated a global threat that required comprehensive response from multiple agencies and allied nations. Sarah's intelligence had provided the foundation for understanding and countering this broader threat. Years later, when military historians analyzed the evolution of counterterrorism doctrine, they would identify Sarah's operation as a turning point in how special operations forces approached sophisticated technological threats. Her combination of electronic warfare expertise and direct action capabilities had created new paradigms for solo operations against complex targets. The Pentagon Metro Station returned to normal operations within days of the incident, but enhanced security measures and radiation monitoring systems served as permanent reminders of how close the nation's capital had come to radiological catastrophe. The thousands of people who used the facility daily would never know that their safety had been secured by someone whose teammates had once questioned her emotional fitness for military service. Sarah Chen had proven that being underestimated could be the greatest tactical advantage of all. Her quiet, competence, and analytical approach had succeeded, where conventional military responses would have failed. The operator who had been dismissed as too emotional had saved the Pentagon from nuclear attack through a combination of technical expertise, strategic thinking, and individual determination that redefined what it meant to be a Navy SEAL. The lessons of her operation would influence military training and doctrine for decades, but Sarah herself remained focused on the simple truth that had guided her through the most critical hours of her life. Mission accomplishment required using every available capability and never accepting defeat when lives were at stake. The quiet ones, she had proven once again, should never be underestimated. The weeks following the Pentagon incident brought changes to Naval Special Warfare Command that nobody could have anticipated. Sarah found herself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond her own unit, as military leaders across all branches began reassessing their approaches to counterterrorism and the integration of advanced technical capabilities into special operations. The classified nature of her operation meant that most of the recognition came through official channels rather than public acknowledgement, but within the special operations community, word spread quickly about the SEAL operator who had single-handedly prevented a radiological attack on the nation's capital. The story became legend, but not in the way that traditional military heroics usually did. Commander Morrison called Sarah into his office 3 weeks after the incident, his expression reflecting a mixture of professional respect and personal introspection that suggested he was still processing the implications of what had occurred. The same briefing room where she had been dismissed and marginalized had been transformed into a planning center for new training protocols based on her electronic warfare techniques. "Chen," Morrison began, setting down a thick folder of evaluation reports and recommendations. "I've been reviewing the after-action analysis from your operation, and I need to address something that should have been said weeks ago. Your tactical observations during our original intelligence briefings were not only accurate, they were prescient. If we had listened to your analysis of the terrorist communication patterns, we might have identified the real threat location hours earlier." Sarah's response was characteristically focused on operational lessons rather than personal vindication. "Sir, the electronic intelligence was available to anyone with the right equipment and training. The important thing is that we prevented the attack and gathered intelligence that will help counter future threats." But Morrison shook his head, his expression indicating that he understood the broader implications of what had occurred. "That's exactly the point, Chen. You had the right equipment and training because you insisted on developing capabilities that the rest of us didn't think were necessary. Your background in electronic warfare gave you insights that none of us possessed." The conversation reflected a fundamental shift in how military leaders were thinking about the integration of technical specialists into traditional combat roles. Sarah's operation had demonstrated that modern threats required interdisciplinary approaches that combined conventional special operations training with advanced technical expertise. Chief Williams entered the office carrying additional documentation related to the ongoing investigation of the terrorist network. His attitude toward Sarah had undergone a complete transformation since the Pentagon incident, evolving from skepticism to genuine respect for someone whose capabilities he had seriously underestimated. "Chen, the intelligence agencies have been analyzing the terrorist communication intercepts you provided, and they're calling it the most comprehensive electronic intelligence gathering operation in counterterrorism history. Your equipment recorded everything from operational procedures to international funding sources." The scope of the terrorist network that had been revealed through Sarah's intelligence was staggering. Connections to organizations across multiple continents, funding mechanisms that involved sophisticated financial networks, and operational capabilities that exceeded anything intelligence agencies had previously documented. Her electronic warfare techniques had provided insights that would influence counterterrorism efforts for years to come. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his expression reflecting the kind of humility that came from recognizing a fundamental error in judgment. The man who had spent months questioning Sarah's emotional fitness for combat operations now understood that he had been evaluating her capabilities using inappropriate criteria. "Chen, I owe you an apology that goes beyond anything I said after the operation. I spent months assuming that your analytical approach and attention to detail were signs of hesitation or emotional instability. I was completely wrong about what makes an effective special operator." Sarah's response revealed the kind of professional maturity that had enabled her to maintain focus on mission objectives despite months of skepticism and marginalization from her teammates. "Rodriguez, we all bring different capabilities to the team. The important thing is that we learned how to integrate those capabilities more effectively." But Rodriguez shook his head, indicating that he understood the broader implications of his previous attitudes. "No, it's more than that. I was evaluating you based on traditional combat criteria without understanding that modern threats require different types of intelligence and expertise. Your operation proved that technical knowledge and analytical thinking can be just as important as physical courage." Thompson joined the group, his massive frame filling the doorway as he carried reports from the Pentagon security review that had been conducted following the incident. His expression reflected genuine amazement at the sophistication of the terrorist operation and the comprehensive nature of Sarah's response. "Chen, the Pentagon security analysis shows that the terrorist surveillance network had been operating undetected for months. They had established observation posts, communication intercepts, and infiltration routes that completely bypassed conventional security measures. Your electronic warfare capabilities were the only thing that could have detected and countered their operation. The revelation that the terrorists had been operating extensively within one of the most secure facilities in the world was deeply concerning to military leaders. But it also highlighted the value of Sarah's unconventional approach to threat detection and analysis. Her electronic warfare techniques had identified patterns that traditional security measures had missed. General Hawkins arrived at the command center for a comprehensive briefing on the lessons learned from the Pentagon incident and the implications for future special operations doctrine. Her presence reflected the high-level attention that Sarah's operation had attracted within the military hierarchy. Specialist Chen, General Hawkins began, her tone carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in special operations leadership. Your operation has fundamentally altered how we think about individual operator capabilities and the integration of technical expertise into direct action missions. The Pentagon incident will be studied as a case example of innovative counterterrorism techniques. Sarah's response demonstrated the kind of forward thinking that had enabled her to succeed where conventional approaches had failed. General, the terrorist threats we're facing are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Their use of advanced technology and operational security measures requires responses that combine traditional special operations training with cutting-edge technical capabilities. The assessment was accurate and reflected insights that were influencing military planning at the highest levels. The Pentagon incident had revealed that future terrorist threats would likely involve coordination between technical specialists and operational personnel, requiring corresponding evolution in counterterrorism capabilities. General Hawkins nodded, her expression indicating agreement with Sarah's analysis, which is exactly why we're establishing a new training program that will integrate electronic warfare specialists directly into special operations units. You'll be leading the development of curriculum and operational procedures. The assignment represented recognition of Sarah's unique combination of technical expertise and operational experience, but it also reflected broader changes in how the military was approaching complex security threats. The integration of electronic warfare capabilities into direct action missions was becoming a strategic priority. Captain Williams, the intelligence officer who had initially dismissed Sarah's analytical contributions, approached with additional documentation related to the terrorist network investigation. His attitude reflected the kind of professional reassessment that had occurred throughout the command structure. Chen, the international intelligence sharing that resulted from your operation has identified terrorist cells in 14 different countries. The communication protocols you intercepted are being used to track funding sources and operational planning across multiple organizations. Your intelligence has become the foundation for a global counterterrorism effort. The scope of the impact was remarkable, extending far beyond the prevention of a single attack to influence international security cooperation and intelligence sharing. Sarah's electronic warfare techniques had provided insights that were reshaping how multiple nations approached terrorist threats. Her training responsibilities expanded significantly as military leaders recognized the need for widespread dissemination of electronic warfare techniques throughout the special operations community. Sarah found herself developing instructional programs that would prepare operators for increasingly sophisticated technological threats. The first group of students in her advanced electronic warfare course included operators from multiple branches of the military, reflecting the interdisciplinary approach that was becoming standard for counterterrorism operations. Their backgrounds ranged from traditional combat specialties to technical fields, creating learning environments that encouraged innovative thinking. Electronic warfare and counterterrorism operations requires understanding both the technical aspects of communication systems and the psychological patterns of terrorist organizations, Sarah explained to her students during their first comprehensive briefing. The terrorists we're facing have access to sophisticated technology and professional training. Countering their capabilities requires equally sophisticated responses. Her teaching methodology emphasized practical application of electronic warfare techniques rather than theoretical knowledge, reflecting lessons learned during her Pentagon operation. Students learned to analyze communication patterns, intercept encrypted transmissions, and develop countermeasures under realistic operational conditions. Sergeant Martinez, who had become one of Sarah's strongest advocates within the unit, was among the first students to complete the advanced training program. His transformation from skeptic to supporter reflected broader changes in attitudes toward technical specialists within the special operations community. Chen, this training has completely changed how I think about gathering and analyzing intelligence during operations. The electronic warfare techniques you're teaching provide capabilities that I never realized were possible for individual operators. Sarah's response reflected her continuing focus on practical applications rather than theoretical discussions. Martinez, modern terrorist organizations are using sophisticated communication systems and operational security measures. Traditional surveillance and intelligence gathering techniques are often insufficient to counter their capabilities. The training programs Sarah developed became models for similar initiatives throughout the military, as leaders recognized the need for technical specialists who could operate effectively in direct action environments. Her combination of electronic warfare expertise and special operations training had created new paradigms for individual operator capabilities. Private Johnson, whose initial skepticism about women in combat roles had evolved into genuine respect for Sarah's abilities, was participating in an advanced electronic surveillance exercise when he made a discovery that highlighted the ongoing value of her training methods. "Ma'am, I'm detecting communication patterns that match the terrorist network protocols from the Pentagon incident. The signals are coming from the Baltimore area, and they're using similar encryption and timing sequences." Sarah's analysis of Johnson's intelligence confirmed that elements of the original terrorist network remained operational, despite the comprehensive investigation that had followed the Pentagon incident. The electronic warfare techniques she had developed were continuing to provide insights into evolving threats. Her coordination with federal agencies led to another successful counterterrorism operation, this one involving multiple agencies, and demonstrating the effectiveness of integrated electronic warfare and direct action capabilities. The Baltimore cell was neutralized before they could complete their operational planning, preventing another potential attack. The success of the Baltimore operation further validated Sarah's training methods and reinforced the military's commitment to integrating electronic warfare capabilities throughout the special operations community. Her techniques were being adopted by units across all branches of the armed forces. Captain Williams, whose intelligence assessments now regularly incorporated electronic warfare analysis, was reviewing reports from multiple ongoing investigations when he identified patterns that suggested coordinated terrorist activity across several major metropolitan areas. Chen were detecting similar communication signatures in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami. The patterns matched the operational security measures used by the Pentagon network, suggesting that we're dealing with a coordinated organization rather than isolated cells. Sarah's analysis of the intelligence confirmed Williams' assessment and revealed that the terrorist threat was far more extensive than anyone had initially realized. The organization responsible for the Pentagon attack had been operating cells throughout the United States, using sophisticated coordination and communication systems. Her electronic warfare techniques were being used to track and monitor terrorist communications across multiple cities, providing intelligence that enabled law enforcement agencies to identify and apprehend terrorist operatives before they could complete their operational planning. The scope of the investigation expanded to include international partnerships, as intelligence agencies recognized that the terrorist network had connections to organizations in multiple countries. Sarah's electronic warfare methods were being shared with allied nations, creating collaborative approaches to global counterterrorism. Commander Morrison, whose leadership had been transformed by the lessons learned from Sarah's operation, was briefing senior military officials on the integration of electronic warfare capabilities into special operations doctrine when he received reports of another potential terrorist threat. Chen, intelligence indicates possible terrorist activity in the Seattle area. The electronic signatures match patterns we've seen from the same network, but the operational security measures appear to be more sophisticated than previous cells. Sarah's assessment of the Seattle intelligence revealed that the terrorists had learned from their previous failures and had implemented enhanced countermeasures designed to defeat electronic surveillance. The evolution of their capabilities required corresponding advances in counterterrorism techniques. Her development of advanced electronic warfare countermeasures led to successful identification and neutralization of the Seattle cell, demonstrating that technical innovation could keep pace with evolving terrorist capabilities. The operation required coordination between multiple agencies and integration of cutting-edge surveillance technologies. General Hawkins, whose support had been instrumental in Sarah's career development, was reviewing reports from the Seattle operation when she identified strategic implications that extended beyond individual counterterrorism successes. Chen, your electronic warfare techniques are not only preventing terrorist attacks, they're providing intelligence that's reshaping our understanding of how modern terrorist organizations operate. The patterns you've identified are influencing counterterrorism strategy at the national level. The recognition reflected the broader impact of Sarah's work, which had evolved from individual operational success to systematic influence on military doctrine and national security policy. Her techniques were being studied and implemented by intelligence agencies throughout the government. Her role as an instructor and developer of electronic warfare doctrine continued to expand as military leaders recognized the need for comprehensive training programs that could prepare operators for increasingly sophisticated threats. Sarah found herself working with technical specialists from across the defense establishment. The integration of her electronic warfare techniques into standard special operations training represented a fundamental shift in how the military approached counterterrorism capabilities. Her methods were becoming part of the basic skill set expected from all special operations personnel. Chief Williams, whose respect for Sarah's capabilities had grown through multiple successful operations, was conducting a training exercise with new recruits when he observed something that highlighted the lasting impact of her influence on military culture. The new operators AR. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.